There's a few things I want to highlight here. Number one is that the problem, ringing in the ears, hissing, ringing, one ear, both ears, center of the head, it most commonly affects people when they're in quiet environments.
Right.
So let's put ourselves in those shoes. I'm trying to relax. I'm trying to settle my nervous system. If I'm trying to read and relax on my couch, the tinnitus is there. It's very loud.
Right.
If I'm trying to go to sleep at night, sleep is generally quiet. Now, people do use sound machines, and that's a pretty normal thing, but most people sleep in a quiet space. So,
We recommend it. Like, as the sleep community, we tell people it needs to be quiet, it needs to be dark, it needs to be cool. Like, how is that supposed to work for somebody with tinnitus? Like, that's actually that environment, I think, would probably make it worse.
absolutely, absolutely. And the nuances with tinnitus are that there's this sound. So, using something called sound therapy, I would say, is the sort of extra variable that
Right.
could go on top of all of the great sleep science that's out there.
For sure.
So, I'd love to just get your perspective of, when you think of basic 2 or 3 tips for someone who hasn't tried anything for sleep, but is really struggling with it.
Mhm.
Where do you normally go? I want to get people's gears turning, not from just I'm listening to this podcast, but maybe I can start implementing some things in my actual, nightly routine.
Absolutely. So the very first thing I like to talk about with people is number one, could you possibly have an undiagnosed sleep disorder? Right. So there is data to show that if you have an undiagnosed sleep disorder and you have a lot of sleep deprivation, that you notice the ringing more. It is much more prevalent. You are much more aware of it, and it has a much greater effect from an anxiety perspective, depression perspective, physiological arousal perspective. And so the very first thing I talk to with all of my tinnitus patients, and to be clear, it's not like I have a ton of you guys out there. I've seen probably maybe 2 to 3 a year over the course of my career, which might be more than most people. The very first thing I want to do is say, hey, could you possibly have a sleep disorder? Let's try to do a sleep study and see. Because if there's underlying, let's say, obstructive sleep apnea as an example, that we have to full stop and we have to fix that first. Because by the way, that could actually make the tinnitus a little bit better, actually significantly better. Because what ends up happening is you get into a deeper sleep, right? And you're able to fall asleep more easily. And so full stop, step number one, if you think there's a universe out there where you could have a sleep disorder, then you should probably get tested. I think step number two has to do with environment, right? And so what is your environment? And is it conducive to sleep with tinnitus? And I think that with tinnitus is really the aspect that we need to be thoughtful of here. So I want to full stop here. What happens in my house? So my house is a little different. We have a lot of crazy things going on in my house. We have 2 French bulldogs in our bed. We have a television that's on all night long. It's a big screen TV, and it's the only way my wife can fall asleep. So people can adapt to many different environments. So that recommendation that comes across like, oh, it needs to be quiet, dark, and cool. Well, it might be for some people, but to be fair, the quieter it is, the more difficult it's probably going to be for you guys. So I would argue that the quiet part probably needs to go away, and we need to think through some different idea sets here. Now, here's what's interesting. Let's say you have tinnitus, but your bed partner doesn't. Aha. And they want to sleep in the quiet, but you need something going on for you. How do we deal with a situation like this? So interestingly enough, and I have no association with these companies, there's a new company out that has earbuds that you actually sleep with. They're designed to be slept in, that has music and things like that. Now, to be fair, it's not a tinnitus
I've
treatment.
tested some of those actually for tinnitus over the years. I like product review.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I know that Bose came out with that product years ago,
Right.
and I
So
think there's been other new companies.
So I'll tell you what happened. So Bose came out with it. They had battery problems. And then the group that was at Bose peeled off of Bose. They fixed the battery problems. And now they've got the device, which is actually kind of cool. My assistant uses it every night because her husband snores. And it keeps her from listening to him. So that's one thing. Also, pillow speakers are things that people can get. A lot of people don't know this. And they're very inexpensive. I mean, they're $30 for a pillow speaker, and you can have it clicked into your phone. You can be listening, not bothering your bed partner at all. Also, there are now eye masks that have built-in speakers with Bluetooth. Like, there's a lot of different ways and shapes and forms that you can do this and still be able to get some level of sleep without total disruption to your bed partner. And that's one way of changing your environment. I will also tell people that if you're not comfortable, you start to notice everything, right? So I don't know about you, but like when I'm too hot, I don't just notice that I'm too hot. I notice everything that's a problem in the room, right? And so you have to really temperature turns out to be a really really big factor for sleep. In fact, most people don't know this, but sleep follows the core body temperature cycle. And so the way sleep basically works is your core body temperature rises, 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 and it gets to a point where it peaks, and then when it drops, that's a signal to your brain to release melatonin, which is kind of that key that starts the engine for sleep. Then what happens is your core body temperature drops, drops, drops throughout the night. At some point around 1 o'clock in the morning, it's supposed to rise. And by the way, that's the time that every person on earth wakes up. Now, a lot of your listeners are going to be like, hey, wait a second, what did he say? Everybody wakes up between 1 and 3 in the morning. Okay. That's because your core body temperature is rising. And so you're immediately going into a lighter stage of sleep. However, 95% of people just roll over and fall back to sleep and don't even remember it. What happens with my tinnitus patients is there's the problem, right? They finally figured out how to get to sleep, and now they woke up and now they're worried, oh gosh, am I going to fall back asleep? Heart rate goes up, and now we're in anxiety world. We're not in go back to sleep world, right?
Yeah.
So there's a few different things that I think people can utilize. So I'm finally getting to the point of what can people actually do in the middle of the night. So one of my favorite techniques is called 4-7-8 breathing. I want to explain why it's one of my favorite, and I want to get your opinion, Ben, if you think this would make sense into this world, because I haven't tried it, but I think it would work well. And so 4-7-8 breathing was developed by Dr. Andrew Weil, and it's exactly what it says. You slowly breathe in for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 7, and you breathe out for a count of 8. The biology on this is quite interesting, but basically what it's forcing you to do is take much deeper breaths in and then expelling air out. And what that does is it uses the total lung, and then your heart doesn't have to beat as fast. So when you're a shallow breather and you're only using half your lung was built to be used entirely because that's how much oxygen needs to be exchanged in the body. When you're breathing lightly and you only have half of your lung, your heart has to beat twice as fast. Now you might be wondering, Michael, you're explaining a lot of biology here. Who cares? Like, what's going on? In order to enter into a state of unconsciousness, you need a heart rate of 60 or below. That's the key finding here. So 4-7-8 breathing does an amazing job after 10 to 12 cycles of dumping your heart rate because you're using the entire lung. So your heart has to work half as hard. And so your heart rate begins to drop. That's number one. And what that does, by the way, is it lowers your anxiety. Guess what? Most people with tinnitus have got a significant amount of anxiety, especially when they wake up at 3 o'clock in the freaking morning and they have to go back to sleep. So we're lowering anxiety by doing this gas exchange and lowering your heart rate. But we're also doing something else that's important, is we're counting. And while you're counting, you can't think of anything else. So you can't think, oh, my ears are ringing. Oh, this is annoying. Oh, all of these different things. And by having that level of distraction while lowering your heart rate through this gas exchange of 4-7-8 breathing, the natural sleep process now has the ability to come back in and take over. And your anxiety, what's going on in your head, doesn't necessarily have that ability because you've been pushing it away by counting and breathing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Let's touch on some of the physiology. So tinnitus really connects to the psychological brain, the limbic system, as it's called, which is designed to, among other things, recognize potential threats or dangers. And
Absolutely. Fight or flight.
it categorizes that tinnitus sound as, an alarm bell or something of that
Got it.
that degree. This internal sound, brain is categorizing as something potentially dangerous or threatening. Then there's the nervous system, which I think most people have heard, but few really understand. And I've gotten the chance to understand it better over the years, where there's a part of our nervous system where we're usually in, being active and in a sort of activated state. And there's a very calm,
Yep.
soothing part of our nervous system. The parasympathetic is called, it would be that
Yep.
calming part. What I've found is that whether whether patients with tinnitus are either understanding the science and going into it, or they're simply doing the practices like
Right.
the guided breathing and
Sure.
things that settle the mind and settle the nervous system, they're often reporting, hey, I'm experiencing some relief. It's not as intrusive. The sound's pushing more to the background. I'm falling asleep more easily when I start to implement the nightly breathing. So all these systems interplay, and given that you're a PhD in clinical psychology, like this is so key, right, for treatment of
Absolutely.
tinnitus as well as chronic pain and insomnia. Do you want to touch on some of
Dude,
that?
here's what's crazy. I wish somebody had taught me about breath work in graduate school. Do you know how many people I could have helped in the last 20 years in the world of sleep if I had had just one course on meditation and breath work during graduate school? But I went to a clinical psychology program that was cognitive behaviorally based. Like we just did cognitive behavior therapy on everybody, and we didn't really care why the problem happened. We are just going to fix the problem. I'm not suggesting that that's a bad route to take, but you should combine different types of therapies because tinnitus is a very unique situation that I think a lot of people could gain, value from by combining some of these idea sets.
Yeah. Talk to us about that. Number 1, for people who are curious, what is
Mhm.
breath work in its simplest
Uh,
form? Let's start there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So when I say something like breath work, it sounds like a very amorphous term. Okay. All we're talking about here is changing the rate at which you breathe or the number of times that you're breathing, right? And there's different ways to do this. Now, I want to be super duper clear. I did not invent breath work. Breath work has been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. If you go into like the yogi sort of world, you go into meditation, you go into Buddhism, Hinduism, all of these different things, they all talk about how to control your body merely with breathing. And so that's really conceptually the idea set behind breathwork. Now, let's break it down into something that's more realistic for all of us, right? So, as an example, that 4-7-8 breathing I was just talking to you about, I do that personally, not just if I wake up in the middle of the night, which can happen on occasion, but like right before I go on stage for a big lecture. Why? I only do 4 or 5 cycles. It lowers my heart rate, gets me calm, makes me thinking. Then I put my game face on and I'm out in front of the audience, right? So that's a use that you can a great use of breath work. Let's break it down even further. Let's say you want to go out for a run, right? How are you breathing before the run? Probably pretty normal, right? Then you do your stretching. By the end of your stretch, you're probably breathing a little bit more because you need oxygen in, because oxygen needs to help your muscles. Now you're on the light jog or your warm up. Oh, your breath has changed quite a bit in order to perform this activity. Okay, now you're going for your personal best. You're at a full out sprint. Guess what? Your breath is very different than it was before. So every person on earth has experienced breath work. Okay. It's just you haven't thought about it like that. So it's a bit of a reframe here for people, but using breathing in unique ways has been shown, and the data is really solid on this, to lower anxiety, to lower depression, to give you energy. Like it can go in either direction that you want it to. You can increase your heart rate and breath work and give yourself energy, or you can decrease your heart rate and breath work and give yourself calm. That's what you're talking about when you talk about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, right?
If you follow Treble Health and get value from these videos, I would highly recommend that you watch the full video from this clip right here, or subscribe to this clip's channel. Every little bit counts, and your support means the world to me. This is Dr. Ben Thompson with Treble Health.